morning, everyone. I'm Valeria Robecco, the ANCA president, and today we are pleased to have here with us Mr. Isaias Medina, a former diplomat at the Venezuelan mission to the UN. Mr. Medina is an international lawyer, humanitarian activist, counterterrorism expert, and he publicly resigned in 2017 to protest human rights violation and denounced more than 20 top officials, including a former head of state to the ICC. And today he's going to here with us to speak about the situation in Venezuela, which is very timely, I think, press conference given the situation in the country. I leave the floor for a couple more words to our colleague from ANCA, Oscar Bolanos, now.
Okay, yes. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and in this important moment press conference on the situation in Venezuela. I met Isaias Medina 3 years ago before his plans, his idea of his resignation to for his mission as a diplomat from Venezuela. And when he put on me the idea of his resignation and believing in our true, trusty friendship we did have. And I asked him if he was sure about what he was trying to do on the decision of the idea of resigning. And he said, yes, of course I am. I had to do something for my country, and because I'm not agree with everything is going on in Venezuela. And I said, okay, if you are sure of what you're trying to do, putting in risk your diplomat career and even putting in risk your life in danger. So I said, okay, sit down and let's do the interview. And that's what I did. I did interview Isaias, and that interview, that's the one you know, you know the interview that I did to him, and it went as a breaking news around the world. And we have been listening from one side of the crisis in Venezuela here at the UN when the member of the government of Venezuela comes to give the statement and not press conferences. So that's why it was very relevant, thinking that it was good to have him here to listening from the other side of the situation. So Mr. Isaias, thank you for coming.
Yours. Thank you.
Please, thank you. I am humbled and honored to be here. And I believe at the outset, the first thing I have to do is to thank you all. Without you guys, without the press, the free press, we wouldn't have real freedom. We wouldn't be where we are today in Venezuela, because there is a complete censorship of the press. And you, each and every one of you, you are the eyes, the ears, and the voice of millions of people that are voiceless, that are oppressed. And I know certainly that you know how to differentiate politics from the need of human rights and to protect civilians that are oppressed by a dictatorship and a totalitarian regime. So I want to, first of all, thank UNCA and my friend Oscar and all of you for being here today. My sincere obeisances from my heart and from 30 million Venezuelans that are not able to be here today, but I will humbly try to express what is happening today. So I thought, if it's all right with you, I can start by giving you a little bit of background and what I've done since my resignation and where we are at today in my country, and perhaps open the floor, because I believe the exchange of ideas is the most important part. And perhaps the regime, of course, will always try to conceal the truth or try to give you a double speak, or sometimes not even listening to your questions, but this is my duty to you today. So I came to the United Nations in 2015, was invited to the Security Council. To me, it's always been a dream, and I tell you sincerely that I love this place. I have many friends under the roof of this organization, and even many friends in this room, of which I'm very grateful, because it has allowed me to have different exchanges, and he gave me the opportunity to be heard into the international community when I saw the opportunity of contributing with my country's situation. And my job was, I think, very easy because of you, because of the international media, to bring awareness of what was happening then, that now is self-evident, but maybe then it wasn't so much. You may clearly remember that being in the Security Council certainly gave some cover to what was happening. And it's very easy when you have a sovereign country, or at least dressed as a sovereign country, reading the UN Charter. Everybody, has to agree. Non-intervention, equal sovereignty rights, inclusive participation. So all these are beautiful prose and poems, but what you have to look is at the actions, not only the words. And that's why when the time came and I saw my country on its knees, I saw the students in the street trying to lift their voices, messages of hope behind cardboard, shields, asking for change, asking for the simple opportunity to choose their government. So when you say self-determination, it sounds very easy and very beautiful, but it is different to say something and then to do something completely different. So you saw Venezuela was at that time in the different committees that they were completely doing the opposite. So didn't allow self-determination through a referendum. They actually violated the norms of our Constitution, usurping the competence of the National Assembly, our Congress, creating and first convening illegally a SOPRA organization called the Constituent Assembly, completely fraudulent and illegal. And that brought the people to the streets. That was the beginning. But even before that, certain things were starting to show up regarding the humanitarian situation, which now is very clear to all of us in this room and in the world. And by then, I thought the best way to help my country was to reach out. We are in the World's Forum, and I found a very compassionate organization, which is the Order of Malta, recognized by Venezuela and 90 other states around the world. They offered to provide assistance, like the US and many countries around the region and Europe are offering today. They did that then, without any political interest, completely free of other interests that were not just to provide at a timely moment food, medicine, and doctors. They already have a network in Venezuela. So for them, it would be easy. So I tried to put them in contact, and I saw their reaction at the beginning. Certainly, we'll meet next Tuesday. Cancel the meeting once, twice, 3 times. So I asked the permanent representative of Venezuela then, Rafael Ramirez, what's going on? These guys are offering everything. They will donate, transport. They will distribute. That will help a lot of people that are now under distress. His answer was pretty clear then. He said, why would we need that? There is no humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. To me, this was a breaking point. Breaking point to see newborn babies. This you can read from Caritas report 2017, where at least 31 newborn babies were dying every day. They were being born already under starvation and malnutrition. So they were just being delivered to die in the next 2 weeks. We're talking about 288,000 children that were projected to die that year. The year before was 11,400. 80% of their mothers after them. So imagine, first the babies, then the mothers, because they were starving as well. And this was in 2017. So 2 years after, you can only imagine the exponential factor of what is happening in Venezuela today. And so when I saw that happening, and then you turn around and social media, the students were in the street. The young students, which is our highest population, we are undergoing and have been undergoing on the Venezuelan population boom, which should have been an incredible moment to grow, to have sustainable development. And it actually is the worst moment in history for youth that could not even complete their studies, that had no future. So the only way they saw fit was to go into the streets and to claim the right to be free. It is actually very important to understand that in the Venezuelan Constitution, there is a duty to rebel against tyranny. This is not only a right or a privilege, it is a duty. If somebody violates the Constitution, every Venezuelan, whether invested of authority or not, has the duty to rebel, to bring the rule of law back. So we were looking at all these things happening. The Supreme Court unveiled itself completely by giving the power of our Congress to the executive. So clearly, no more separation of powers. Clearly, not meeting the responsibility to protect its citizens. Again, in Venezuela, Article 83, it's a right for the civilian population to receive food and health care. It is a right within the Constitution. It's a constitutional right that the state has to provide and guarantee food and health. And it was being criminalized. If doctors spoke out, they would be put into jail. And you saw this was happening at a rate of people being killed daily, of guards shooting students, of journalists put into jail or being expelled from the country. So what could I do? Honestly, I felt like a caged lion. I didn't know what to do. I love my job. I love my country even more. My people were being killed. Today, I will tell you something that I've never said before in this forum. I come from a long line of politicians in my family. My great-grandfather, a military general, war hero. He died in one of the last invasions from Colombia that were coming from Trinidad. My grandfather, 32nd president of Venezuela during World War II. It's called the most democratic president in history of Venezuela. He was the first Venezuela to step into the White House, the first Venezuela to speak the US Congress. He was an ally against the Nazism at that time. My father, twice a senator, twice a congressman, not only my mentor, but my best friend. I've been bred democracy since even before I was born. And to find myself here, where I thought I was doing the best I could for my country. I remember, if you allow me to share with you some of my experiences at the United Nations. I was part of the initiative to ban plastics because of the damage to the oceans. Today, we see this a reality. I was elected vice president for the Latin American region for the high-level conference on the oceans. And my country wasn't even, is still not a party of UNCLOS, but I was doing that fight for the world, representing my country, and I saw myself limited. No humanitarian aid being accepted. I saw young students as 20 years old as they're being killed today, and we'll get to that. More than 40 people have been killed, mostly students, shot to the head and genitals today. More than 1,000 political prisoners, civilians, being tortured as we speak. More than 200 military political prisoners in Venezuela being tortured. When they ask for water, they make them drink from the toilet. This is just one simple fact. So what could I do? Well, I had the pleasure of sharing with a lot of journalists like yourselves, like my friend sitting right here beside me. I used to play soccer with our coach right here, till I hurt my knee. But certainly, I tell you this. Humanitarian assistance has no color or political party. And to step up and make a decision to talk and to stand up of what I know today, it's 4 different drug cartels run by generals, the highest ranking officials in the military. Remember this, in Venezuela there are more than 1,000 generals. I don't think another country has so many generals. But this is why they needed to keep control. But we have to look back a little bit before when Chavez was in power. You know, there was a coup in 2002. And when he was brought back, he had to design a contingency plan. And all I'm going to tell you, besides, I'm just going to take this small propaganda here. I'm writing a book on it, so certainly it will come up. You will see all the sources and quotations. But certainly, he had to design a Plan B contingency plan. And this contingency plan could not hold on the military because they were the ones that not only took him out, but brought him back in power. So this is where we see what is happening today. Militias, we have 60 non-state armed groups called Los Colectivos, not only armed and sponsored by Maduro's regime, but also trained by Hezbollah. So where are they trained? They have training camps in Venezuela. There is a small town in Syria called Little Venezuela. Please look it up. In this town, they've taken operatives of these militia groups, copy-pasting what happened in Iran in 2009 with the Green Revolution. This is state terrorism. But this is one of the concerns. So when you saw these people going out, besides the National Guards, which at that time, Iris Varela was Minister of Penitentiary in Venezuela, they were taking criminals out of the prisons to be dressed as National Guards, masked National Guards. I don't know if that is normal in any other country, but I find it that the authorities should not cover their faces when they're trying to contain a protest. But they were masked, and they're masked for a reason. They're either part of the 22,000 Cuban agents infiltrated in the armed forces in Venezuela. This is a reality. They're also infiltrated in political institutions, running the show. So we have to be aware that Venezuela is already an intervened, invaded territory by foreign powers. We have, besides the Cubans running the show and telling Maduro how to act, that's why he always flies back to Cuba for the instructions. We have the G2 in La Orchila, which is a beautiful island off the coast, the north of Venezuela, where not only Cubans, but also Russians and Chinese intelligence they have a listening base. This is interesting to know. So when you see all these different powers in one country, you have to wonder yourself, where are we standing? Whose interest is Maduro protecting? Is it only one person? So this is the answer of why it's so difficult for him to step down. And then again, of course, if you look through the country and through Chavez's background, he also invited ELN and FARC to come into the country. More than 40% of Venezuelan territory is already taken by ELN. ELN is not only acting as an illegal transnational organized crime organization, but also is massacring people in the illegal mining department. So gold now has become the new green, because with the effectiveness of sanctions, they had to look for a way out. And that's why now Turkey is buying gold illegally. Why do I say illegally? Not only because it's sanctioned, but because they're exploiting it illegally, because they're destroying the environment to enrich themselves and to sponsor terrorism. So I would not be surprised if the US were to add to the list of sponsors of terrorism Maduro's regime. I think it's actually way overdue, like is overdue the international humanitarian aid. Since day one, and this is what I've learned here. We were here at Security Council 2 years. We've worked, and I'm so grateful that last year, now it's in the agenda of the General Assembly, responsibility to protect civilians. It may have had its ups and downs, but it's in the heart is in the right place. When authoritarian, totalitarian regimes act against their population, the international community has the obligation to step in. And I think this is what is happening right now. And I am so grateful, not only to the US, Colombia, Brazil, Grupo de Lima, the EU, they have come together and understood now with the window of opportunity, the legal window that we were talking about before. When Maduro convened illegally and fraudulently the Constituent Assembly, which of course is completely null and void, he used it to convene also a fraudulent election. And this fraudulent election, which also not only was void by origin and illegitimate, but also did not allow transparent and fair elections. And that is why the 10th of January, there is this void of the executive power. So legally, the designated survivor in our Constitution by Article 233 is the President of the National Assembly. Today, interim President Juan Guaidó. It was repudiated then by more than 50 states, and now you see we're very close to more than 40-some states that have recognized him as the legitimate president. So it is my understanding, and I would like to share with you today, that we must differentiate two things. One, the obligation of the international community to assist and prevent more deaths by weaponization of starvation and medicine scarcity. As you know, this is one of the tools and instruments that has been used by this regime to suppress and oppress the people, to control social and political control of the civilian population. So if you do not have this Homeland card, which by the way is made by ZTE and monitors every move that these people do, where they buy their food, if they have this disease or not, where did they move, did they buy gasoline or not, just to know if they voted or not voted for the regime, of course, then you are politically apartheid and you will not receive any of the treatments that their political party constituents do. This is not within the Constitution. We only have one ID. We don't have this ZTE control, social control card in our Constitution. So it has been imposed in order to have their own humanitarian aid, which, by the way, has been part of a corruption scheme from Maduro, and this is noticeable from Mexico, and now it's coming from Turkey. So I believe he actually feels it's a competition to receive US aid or any other coalition help, because it would compete with his own humanitarian food ration boxes. It is incredible to see that this beautiful, incredible country, today, it's in the worst condition in the Latin American history. They have destroyed, in purpose, I have to say, because it's impossible to have more than $300 billion in income in 12, 14 years, and now be in debt and have an inflation projected by the IMF of more than 10 million% per this year. And it's because of grand corruption. The exchange control scheme, now completely unveiled because of trials in the US courts, because of the confession of El Tuerto Andrade, Chavez's treasurer, who has confessed of taking more than $1 billion only from one person, Maduro's backman, Gorrin, a TV mogul overnight, of course, because it's very easy. If you have the privilege of receiving very cheap dollars to then sell in very expensive bolivars, and then with those same bolivars, rebuy cheap dollars and do the same centrifuge over and over and over, you're going to break the treasury one time or another. And this is what has happened. They've stolen the people's treasure, and that's why supermarket shelves are empty, and that is why there is no medicine. Because those dollars were supposed to be used to import medicines, food, and services. So today we see at least 3 out of 4 hospitals completely closed. Doctors have committed suicide because patients, victims were dying in their hands and they didn't know anything to do with it. Today, my friends, that people with diabetes are dying for lack of insulin, something that should be free. They're dying for this very cheap insulin takes. They started by cutting their limbs. Now they're just passing away, fading away. I get a lot of Instagram and messages and Twitter messages from associations of diabetes, because I spoke out once and they found finally somebody's talking about our problem, because it seems so far away to understand that people would die only for lack of insulin. Same thing is happening with people with cancer, people with AIDS, people with any chronic disease or organ transplant. They're dying every day, at least, and this is a projection from 2017. Now I cannot even fathom the name. 900 people daily. 900 people are dying daily only because of lack of medicine, starvation, and no medical attendance. This is a very important number. This comes from the president of the Medical Federation in Venezuela, President Natera, 2017. Once again, if we go back and we see the children that are dying daily, 288,000. So if you do the math, more than 500,000 people in 2017 have died. How many have died after that? So this is very important. I'm sorry, how long do we have?
Maybe 1 hour. We should maybe open the floor for questions.
I'm sorry, I'm just giving you, I'm trying to give you the, but certainly I'm open for questions 100%.
I'm sure they have many, so
Please.
that's why, yes.
I tell you what, I apologize. Sometimes I get carried away because it's something very close to my heart that my own countrymen are dying for simple preventable reasons. This is without talking about the people that are dying every 20 minutes just from violent crimes, or the people the regime has killed in the street or in tortures. So please, I'm open for question. I apologize.
Thank you. I'm going to do a very quick one, and then what has changed in the people mentality in the last 2 years about the situation in Venezuela, political, humanitarian?
Well, I have to tell you this. Very hard 2 years. A lot of people depressed. That's why so many people have left the country. 3.5 million, if I'm not mistaken, have been forcibly displaced. So people, at a point in time, gave up. They were being oppressed, no food, no medicine, violence, this state terrorist shooting, terrorizing, these messages. There was no hope. So what has changed is this opportunity right now. This opportunity that opened the window to change a very depressing situation into a hopeful possibility. And of course, we have to thank the international community. We have to thank you guys for it. But now the faces in Venezuela are different. They are looking hopeful, and they certainly many people want to come back. I'd love to go back to my country.
Thank you. Maggie Bashir?
Hi. Thank you, Margaret Bashir, Voice of America. Oh, you have one. Thanks. Mr. Medina, can you just explain to us a little bit if you have a formal role within the opposition, if you're linked with Mr. Hudo formally, or are you just speaking in your personal capacity as someone who used to be here as a diplomat? If you could explain that. And then secondly, what do you want to see happen in Venezuela? Do you want regime change? And what do you think it will take to achieve whatever it is you're seeking?
Well, thank you for your question. First of all, I am a humble Venezuelan citizen. I'm trying to speak out for the millions of voiceless Venezuelans. That's why I'm so humbled to be here today. I certainly have spoken to several of the opposition leaders in my country, mostly to congratulate them for their courage. It's very different to be speaking out here today, even if I was persecuted or had death threats or I'm under political asylum. But to be in Venezuela in this moment and to have the courage that Juan Guaido has had to take over this responsibility, which is his duty as President of National Assembly, chapeau. This is something that every Venezuela now is joined by the hope of this 35-year-old president. Now, do I think, what do I want? Yes, of course, I want my country to be free. I want my babies to be born fat like little Buddhas and happy. I want medicines to go back and hospitals to be operating and to have a free election. I think that's where we're headed. Certainly now how to arrive there, we have to look at certain elements that there's a lot of moving pieces here. For example, the humanitarian assistance. If you've noticed lately, they blocked the entrance. So not only before they denied the humanitarian crisis, but now they are blocking the entrance. So at a point, we're very close to a point of no return. I believe that, and we must separate something that people like to say maybe it's a military intervention, it's an invasion. No, let's separate things. International humanitarian intervention, it's a military operation other than war. This is from the military playbook. It happens with natural disasters. You know this. But this is a man-made disaster. This is Maduro's regime and his accomplices to maintaining power. But it still is a disaster. People are dying every day. It's unquestionable that this is happening. So what does a military operation other than war do? It brings humanitarian aid and with military support. Of course, there are rules of engagement. They're trying to protect doctors, food, medicine. Now, if they come in and they have to remove the obstacles to provide the protection and aid to the people, if they're attacked, now that's a different game altogether. But it is legal, and President Guaido said it a couple days ago, it is legal to have humanitarian intervention in Venezuela. But I would have to humbly add, it is not only legal, it's inevitable, and it's unstoppable.
Thank you. Nabile, then Gianpaolo.
Thank you. Thank you for this press conference. So you talked about Hezbollah's role in Venezuela. Do you have more details? Because we have heard these accusations before. So can you share any more details, names? You also talked about a town in Syria. Like, do you have a name for this town? Any like information that can support these allegations? And I have many questions if we do round two also. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to say that Mr. Medina is also available after for a one-on-one interview, so everyone that is interested have more time later.
Amazing question, very important, and thank you for giving me the time to do that. Let me tell you, you gotta look back a little bit into Argentina, the nuclear situation that happened then, what happened with the Jewish bombings, how Chavez intervened in all of that. And that's where it starts. But if you look back, and there are many things about air terror, I don't know if you heard about it, but they had this direct flight to Iran and to Syria. And they used to call it themselves, they call it like that. And then you had, for example, General Antonio Rivero saying that 50,000 tons of uranium reserves are deemed viable and being exploited by Iran, coltan, thorium. So we'll keep going, if you allow me. This is done in the Jerez and Caroní Bolivar state. And I must say, I just wanted to add that ELN is exploiting areas of common heritage of humankind, protected by UNESCO. They're just destroying it for illegal mining of gold. And now we're going to get there. So check this out. The U.S. Department of Treasury designated in 2008 two Venezuelan-based supporters of Hezbollah, Ghazi Nasr al-Din and Vazi Kanan. You must know these names. If not, you look at it in the FBI. I think they're in the list for sure. These people not only were serving former Vice President Tarek el-Aissami, these are his right-hand men, connection to Hezbollah, Syria, Lebanon, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. These guys were selling passports, and you will see later that at least 10,000 passports were sold, of which 173 or 74 are of known people of interest, terrorist organizations. So Mr. Ghazi Nasrin al-Din and Fauzi Kanan, please, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but these people are under the OFAC list. You saw also that he utilized his position as a Venezuelan diplomat and the president of Caracas-based Shia Islamic Center to provide financial support to Hezbollah. Nasir al-Din served until recently as charge d'affaires at the Venezuelan embassy in Damascus, Syria, and was subsequently appointed as the director of political aspects at the Venezuelan embassy in Lebanon. Nasrin al-Din has counseled Hezbollah donors on fundraising efforts and has provided donors with specific information on bank accounts where the donors' deposit would go directly to Hezbollah. Ghazi Nasr al-Din has met with senior Hezbollah officials in Lebanon to discuss operational issues as well as facilitated the travel of Hezbollah members to and from Venezuela. In late January 2006, Nasr al-Din facilitated the travel of two Hezbollah representatives to the Lebanese parliament to Caracas to solicit donations for Hezbollah and to announce the opening of Hezbollah-sponsored community center and office in Venezuela. So they use these cultural centers. Of course, we have an incredible, beautiful Syrian community, 50,000 at least. So this serves as cover. They can go in and out. They have Venezuelan accreditation passports. These passports are legal. Now, these people are not Venezuelan. So imagine how difficult for intelligence agencies to pursue these people with sovereign identities as passing as Venezuelans when they're not. Is this not sponsor of terrorism? So, I can give you several more, but I want to answer your question about the Kavim, for example, the sanctions on Venezuelan military industries, and how the Iran has many, not only diplomatic, but contracts with Kavim, which is the military industry. And the bank, there was this bank, Iran's military, I'll show you. It's called the Banco Internacional de Desarrollo, which was also partners with Iran, was sanctioned by OFAC because they were circumventing the sanctions to support Iran financially. Yes.
Okay. So let's go because the time is
Yeah.
running.
Did you have the second
Maybe
question?
Gianpaolo
What was the
adesso-
second one?
I'm looking for the name of the town. I found it.
You mentioned before, but yeah. No, I have two small questions. One is this. What do you think that can come out from the conference of Montevideo? And the second one, if it's true that Godoy and Maduro asked the intercession of the Pope, just today it was in Italian media. So do you think that could be a way through? Because what concerns me is that the decision that the food that entered to Venezuela, or medicine entered to Venezuela, can only be protected by foreign forces. So that's because if people from ZTE need the food and medicine, or other people from the opposition need the same food and medicine, maybe United Nations can organize an international distribution through agency, but not through military. That's what I'm saying. Military are not fighting people that are bringing food. You know, maybe they fight in other military that are protecting people. What do you think?
Thank you, Paolo. Let me tell you, first of all, I want to commend the efforts of the EU and different Latin American countries for trying to reach out an agreement on something that is very difficult, almost impossible, I would say. So if you see a regime that is still, as we speak, torturing civilians, 2 days ago, a 20-year-old died in prison from the protests. 20-year-old died in prison. Starvation and medicines, because they don't give him food, and I told you already what they give him to drink. They torture them, electricity. They use rape as a tool of violence and repression. They are shooting the students in the face and in the genitals as we speak. So do you think this is a regime that wants to negotiate or dialogue? Remember, double speak. You have, Nicolas Maduro saying something, they're doing something completely different. I think now everyone is aware of what he's doing. So it's very difficult for him to keep trying to distract the attention on these ineffective talks and dialogues. They tried. I think they actually, yesterday they came up with a statement that is very close to what President Guaido has been asking: transitional government, clean elections. Now, how are we going to have elections with an invaded territory that is not only normal criminal organizations, but it is the convergence of transnational organized crime, sponsoring terrorism, illegal mining, and occupied by forces of ELN, FARC, Hezbollah? I mean, please, let's try to bring some coherence here. We need to put order. We need to retake our territory. We're not asking for an invasion. We're asking to vacate the invaders so that we can bring back the rule of law, we can bring back justice, peace through justice, and we can bring back democracy. To do that, we need certain space to accommodate a free election. But it's not like in 30 days you can hold an election in a country that is being overrun by criminals. So we have to see the reality first, and that should have been one of the first topics to be discussed in the Montevideo discussions. It was not brought up. Who's talking about the 22,000 agents, Cuban agents infiltrating the military? Who's talking about the $64 billion of the economic cloud of China? They should be negotiating with China as well. They have their interest at hand. Who's talking to Russia, for example, who has not only sold more than $12 billion in weapons arsenal to Venezuela and has other interests in oil? They should be in the table as well if we want to reach a solution. So let's be real. If we're just going to say, the Pope, the Holy Pope, certainly, I mean, I'd rather not say, but certainly he could be more helpful. I mean, the regime is very clearly terrorizing its population. So let's try to find a way, but first let's see the facts and then look for a solution.
So basically you say that only civil war can solve the problem?
There is already civil war, Paul, even if you don't know it. Right now, the monopoly of force is only held by one person.
No, I understand, but numbers are not there yet for civil war. Civil war is in other countries with thousands of people in, and not there yet. I mean, shoot by the other side. If they die by starvation, that's another story.
We have the same consequences as a civil war with only one monopoly of power and of use of force, which is Maduro's regime. So we have to face the fact. We are in a conflicted situation already. What we need is a solution. Political solution for sure, but the political solution has to be on how and when is he leaving. Listen, I am surprised myself. President Guaido has been like Mandela. He's offering amnesty. He's building golden bridges, and they still don't want to leave. Why? Ask yourself why. Because it's not only his interest. There are too many interests that are held internationally.
Carol?
Mr. Medina, I'm Carol Landry with AFP, Agence France Presse. I know you've left the mission, but I was wondering if you're still in contact with some people there, and what are you hearing about perhaps a possible shift in terms of the representation there? Could that happen in terms of appointing someone who would represent Guaido? And there's some discussion about the Security Council also, whether Russia, the US might come forward with some draft resolutions on Venezuela. Have you heard anything on that?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, I believe you've noticed that President Guaido has already appointed a special representative to the OAS. It should be only natural that he should appoint somebody to the United Nations to reach the Credentials Committee, also to seek confirmation and recognition from more than the 50 states and of the membership of the UN, and to be represented here, because he is representing the Venezuela as a whole and is legally according to the Constitution. So certainly, I believe he should be doing that. And the U.S. was very clear when Mr. Pompeo was here in the last meeting in the Security Council. He said that now they would reach out to the other P2, China and Russia, and to try to find out a way. I think that's the only way out. They have too many interests to think that they could be left out. The same as Cuba. I think Cuba is #1 player of this disaster. And I'm sorry, I'm not talking about the Cuban population. I'm talking about the Castro communist regime that is oppressing my people.
Melissa, in the back.
Sorry, I was just having a recording. Thank you very much for coming here today. I'm hoping for 2 brief answers because I know I have many colleagues who want to ask questions. I wanted to ask you one, what do you think of this tactic being used by many countries to tie money and aid to Maduro stepping down? We've even seen Juan Guaido go on television and say the military has a big decision to make. This aid will not get in as long as Maduro is there. What do you think of that tactic? Because as we've heard many times, the military are the linchpin in all of this. Do you think that that's something that might change them? And 2, very quickly, the fact that the U.S. hasn't removed the threat of military action, hasn't taken it off the table. No other country, but the U.S. is doing that. Do you think that that helps or hinders Maduro's cause? Because Maduro, of course, is claiming that the U.S. wants to invade. So is that something that actually maybe hinders Guaido's? There you go. That's my question.
Thank you. More than 80% of the military are suffering the same circumstances and the fate of the Venezuelan population. Hunger, long lines to buy anything, bread. They're under the same social control apartheid card. So I believe he's actually talking to them, medium and low range military. High range military, very difficult. They're compromised through drug trafficking networks, the Cartel de los Soles, and so on, and also through grand corruption. I mean, these generals, 1,000, I told you, at least they're all. Look at if you look at all the ministries, they are run by the military. PDVSA, oil state company, used to be the 5th largest in the world. Now is it's run by a military. He doesn't know what he's doing. Same thing is happening because they have quotas of power. So they're not going to walk away like that, even though I have to say Guaido is trying his best. In your second question, which is very important, yes, I think we need the strength of the U.S., Brazil, Colombia. Brazil and Colombia are most impacted by this overflow of refugees. And refugees carry, different concerns. Not only the straining of the economy and so on, at least $40 million has cost Colombia attending in hospitals Venezuelan refugees. Brazil has been, in fact, now you see xenophobia, now you see different areas of concerns. What about this 10,000 passports and identification that we know already that there are links to terrorism? Can there be a terrorist overflow within more than 3.5 million refugees into these frontiers? Absolutely. So we do need more strength to negotiate with a strong man, yes. And remember, he's backed up by Cuba, Russia, and China. So we need the U.S. to keep its tight control, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the moral thing to do.
David and then Edie.
Hi, if I can just follow up on Melissa's question. This is David from Bloomberg, by the way. If Maduro hangs on, I just want to make sure I understand your point. Do you think the U.S. should be using military force? And you mentioned Colombia and Brazil. Do you think Brazil and Colombia are being too reticent? Do you think they should be more aggressive in their threats? And if I can just, and one more point, do you think the Trump administration is actually doing a good job in sort of coordinating international action here?
Yes, and once again, if you allow me, please, to clarify, it's not military intervention. It's international humanitarian intervention. Yes, I do think the U.S. should keep going in the way it is. And I'm not only saying that Maduro is a threat to the maintenance of peace of the region. He is a clear and present danger and a risk to the national security of the United States. This is a very anti-Western, anti-democratic, anti-American regime. So certainly they must, I mean, if I can tell you all this, I'm certain that the intelligence community knows way more than I do. So we must keep that in mind. But the main interest, the main intention and objective here is to bring humanitarian assistance. And if it must be done by military support, so be it. It has to be done. Or are we going to keep killing people, babies, women, children, men in the street and in hospitals to maintain a regime, a totalitarian regime in power?
Edie?
Thank you very much. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Nice to see you again. Can you tell us first, what have you been doing since you left the mission? Have you been living in the United States? And you know, you've given us lots and lots of figures, like 80% of the military suffering humanity. Where do you get all of that information from?
Thank you for your kind question. Nice to see you again as well. Well, I got to tell you a couple of things. First of all, before I resigned, I requested an arms embargo to the Security Council and to the Secretary General. Of course, I spoke to the Office of the Prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, before I resigned, and I denounced the humanitarian crisis as a crime against humanity. And I must say, this is very important for me to share today. When I did that, and also served as a witness to the OAS in the report of crimes against humanity that was then historically brought forward by 6 different state parties of the Rome Statute. And I then, and I would like to say it now, I denounced more than 20 officials. And I would like to read some of these names, because sometimes it's important not to forget that these people are acting against the population. And some of them even are thinking about running for president or candidates from the PSUV, the socialist, from the Socialist Party. I'll find it here. But anyway, I will remember a few. Remember this, the suffering and death caused by the action or inaction of a government or its high officials is also for individual criminal accountability, and there should be hold for it. So these are alleged crimes against humanity committed by President Maduro, all of whom have denied so far the humanitarian crisis. President Maduro, Rafael Ramirez, Arreaza, who comes here now as minister, foreign minister, he served in different positions. He's also being denounced there. Delcy Rodriguez, and a list of 20, which I am more than glad to provide to you. So these people are also under the examination, preliminary examination of the International Criminal Court. What I've did since I left, well, besides that I just told you, I requested the Supreme Court in exile, who was also persecuted and had to leave the country and was installed in the Organization of American States. I requested to declare the humanitarian emergency and to request international humanitarian intervention. This in 2017. I can provide the request and the decision. I actually brought it here as well to the Secretary General, to the United Nations Security Council, and brought to at least 30 different organizations in different places in New York and Washington in order to provide humanitarian assistance. And this was a decision made legally by the Supreme Court. After that, I joined, of course, the resistance movement of Rumbo Libertad, who is the only right-wing movement in Venezuela. And that is based right now in Brazil, with Roderick Navarro and Eduardo Vitar, who have been working very closely with Bolsonaro, and now you've seen the difference of Bolsonaro being in the Lima group. So I would not say they've been shy about it. They very clearly know that this is a threat to their national security and to the maintenance of peace and security of the region. And also, after that, I had the fortune of being accepted to Harvard Kennedy School of Government, being financed by the university to right now take a master's in political administration and a certificate in management, leadership, and decision-making sciences. So besides that, I've been investigating since I left, nonstop, and I still have my network of people, not only inside the territory with civilians and also with different militaries inside and outside Venezuela, that we're working together to restore justice, freedom, and democracy in my country.
Mercedes, and then Ibtizan and Stefano.
Thank you. Mr. Medina, this is Mercedes Gallego with the Spanish newspaper El Correo. How are you doing? I apologize, I don't know exactly your background as a diplomat with the Venezuelan mission. I would like if you can elaborate and tell us what was your background as a diplomat and what was the process for you to actually turn against the regime. And also the strategy about Venezuela have it's also a change of strategy toward Latin America and a return of some very dark characters from the past, like Elliot Abrams. Do you think this is gonna change the policies of the United States in Latin America and bring back some of those from the 80s? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my diplomatic background actually starts and ends right here at the United Nations. I'm an international lawyer, certainly have different expertise, mostly investment state arbitration, commercial maritime arbitration, concessions, privatizations, BOTs. I was a corporate lawyer with Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher in the 90s, and I was invited to be part of the mission. While I was here, I can tell you this, I brought the first vote, the prevailing view in UNCI trial in more than 70 years, and I was backed up and won with a vote from the United States then. Many things. I've been elected rapporteur for the 6th Committee of International Law. I was legal advisor of the mission. I was also elected, as I told you before, as vice president to the high-level conference on the oceans. I was elected rapporteur as well for the charter. There was this committee to look at the charter, and we came into a consensual agreement to review different alternatives for dispute resolution, which would be very helpful to review now, and many other things. I found my home here. I love the UN. And about the new...
I'm sorry, just to continue on that, how did the Maduro regime trust you representing them?
You know, there was a very interesting article, but it's in Spanish, but I can share it with you, that says that I was the diplomat that, ¿cómo se dice? Se escurrió entre las manos, came through there, se escurrió entre las manos del chavismo, no? So I think they didn't see me coming. I was certainly working here with the 6th Committee of International Law, working with all 193 countries. The only thing I have a red line on violating the Constitution, breaking the rule of law, no separation of powers, and killing students, and of course the humanitarian crisis. So when I saw those elements converging, I had to make a decision. I could have gone peacefully. I certainly had the fortune of having other proposals, but I had to choose. Should I be comfortable in another place watching what's from the sidelines, or step up and do something for my country? And I certainly took the second decision. I will not stop until my last breath.
We have a lot of questions. Yeah, just one question. Maybe you can continue to talk after if you have others.
Yes, absolutely. I think in the chessboard of politics, we need people with strong will. And if you say, will this change Trump's view of Latin America? No, I think he has been very clearly his administration, the troika of horror. Nicaragua. Look at Nicaragua, what's happening now. Look at Cuba. Look at Venezuela. They're all interlinked. And I think after Venezuela, Nicaragua and Cuba are next. Make no mistake about it. We have to bring back democracy and freedom to the American hemisphere.
Hi, in the back behind the cameras. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have two follow-up questions. The first one regarding the names and the figures you provided about Hezbollah. The dates you gave were from 2006 and 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have, first of all, where do you have this information from? And do you have any information about actual names and figures now? And you were part of the regime. I mean, you were part of this government when we are talking about these dates, like later on. And another follow-up regarding.
Sorry, if you don't mind to limit it, because otherwise.
But no, the other question were like in one segment. The other one, when you talk about humanitarian intervention under military protection, can you specify what do you exactly mean, and why not asking for a UN intervention in this case? Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And I have to say again, my diplomatic background starting in 2015 ended in 2017. As a legal advisor, very technical person, completely dedicated to my work in the Sixth Committee and the Security Council. All this information I'm telling you is after 2 years of investigation. I would be more than honored to share it with you. Open source. This is why I'm so glad to be here, because it's thanks to you, to the international media, that you can allow this. That's why technology allows it. And in the same way, I would have to answer your question. I think international humanitarian intervention and responsibility to protect have a lot of room for improvement. For example, cyber intervention. No damage, no kinetic force. I can talk about that for a while. I've been working on it. Second, monitored R2P. We have so many possibilities and technology available that not using it is a crime. So we could meet and comply with the highest standard of the United Nations and IHL if we had R2P monitored, and also the rules of engagement. So these are very important questions. And you asked also why the UN is not involved. Well, listen, I think we have reports from the United Nations High Commissioners on Human Rights when Prince Al Said was here. Incredible details. Now we have a new High Commissioner. She has been invited to go to Venezuela. I think she should have been there since the 10th. If we talk about preventive diplomacy, then we have to take the actors to the ground to see what is happening, not when it's calm and beautiful and walk them around where the regime wants to, but when there is trouble. That's when they should be there. Also, the Secretary General has talked about the humanitarian crisis. I mean, the reports are there. I believe that this is the time for the Organization of the United Nations to step up and to bring up possibilities. Why not? Because if not, member states will have to do it by themselves. And thank God we have the OAS and Secretary General Almagro, who has taken a stand for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law in Venezuela. And that's why today we have the conditions that we have. The Hezbollah questions, well, as I was telling before, and I'm sorry if I was not clear enough, it's open source, and I would be more than willing to share, everything that I have on the links of terrorism with the Chavista regime and Hezbollah, and other ones, ELN and FARC and so on.
Stefano and then Ibis from Prensa Latina.
Stefano Vaccara, Voce di New York, Radio Radicale in Rome. I'm trying to think in this moment how for the people that instead are not convinced or have been, saying that what the story of Venezuela is not what the United States or others are trying to. Not because I believe it, just I wanted to contemplate. I want to know how you can convince people. Okay, there is too many déjà vus, especially in Latin America. Déjà vu. Things that happen means how the overthrow of a government. They've been saying this happened before. But you mentioned also responsibility to protect. And here, when we hear responsibility to protect, then we think to Libya and what happened later. We think to Syria and what happened later. We can think Yemen and so on. So, can you tell us clearly, are you promoting here that Venezuela needs when you're talking about intervention, okay, by the United Nations, or by what kind of specific intervention you support to prevent the so-called deja vu that we already seen for so many years?
Excellent question. I think it's self-evident. If you see, well, the thing is, today social media is so incredible. I would love to maybe, and there's a couple of documentaries, but certainly the conditions in the hospitals, when you see children, babies, this looks like a concentration camp. Women are giving birth in the floors, and the babies are coming already just little bones. This is happening. People are dying in the street. 3 million people are eating from the garbage. So I understand that there's like two worlds. One, billionaires that have stolen the treasury and now they're living high lives, even with Ferraris in Caracas. And then you see the real life of, 85, 86% extreme poverty. And in the street, it's not homeless people. They just cannot afford to buy food. And if they can, they can't find it. And they have to scavenge from the garbage. I'd love to share these pictures. I see them every day. Sometimes I try not to, but I have to. And what I am, yes, I am actually advocating for an international humanitarian intervention. International humanitarian intervention under the responsibility to protect. Doctrine of 2005.
But the responsibility to protect, it was, when it happened, for example, in Libya, it didn't happen with the medicine or with the doctors. It happened with planes flying from Sicily, bombing Tripoli. And then we know what happened later, because Libya now is in a status of total. So, and Syria, the same thing. I mean, there was not, because there was a veto of Russia, but Syria is in a huge mess, and a lot of people died. So how we can prevent this happening also in Venezuela?
I think by the use of technology, as you've noticed, and this is very clear, and now it's public news, they're blocking the humanitarian aid. Why are they blocking it? Why didn't they let it in? There were no military support there. So now they are actually pushing for military support to happen. Why? Because people are needing this effectiveness. Now, can we improve past experiences? Yes. Did you know that there's more than 77 references of resolutions in the Security Council about responsibility to protect? People think it's dead. No, it's more alive than ever. Look it up. And now where are we going with this? The sovereign power, the original sovereignty power lies in the people. And when there is the blur of the government and the state lines, and the regimes, authoritarian regimes, are starting to act against their populations, this is our responsibility to protect from the international community. Now, can we improve it? That's what I was telling to your dear colleague back there, that we can use technology, and I have a lot of ideas that we can certainly work with, and also with Harvard University, on how we can implement technology to meet the highest standard of compliance for international humanitarian intervention, the highest standard of the UN and of international humanitarian law. There's also the rules of engagement. So why only look at the past if we can improve it? If people are dying every day, if there's a stronghold of these totalitarian regimes that just want to hold to power and kill the civilian population, why can we not be creative and find correct ways to improve such doctrines that have not been so successful in the past?
Thank you. Last question, Prensa Latina.
Hi, thanks. Iris Frade from Prensa Latina News Agency. I would like to speak in Spanish, but you can answer me in English if you want. Usted habla de una intervención humanitaria en Venezuela, pero altos representantes del gobierno de Estados Unidos no descartan la vía de una intervención militar, con todo lo que una intervención militar representa para la población civil. ¿Cuál es su opinión al respecto? También, ¿por qué la oposición rechaza la vía del diálogo en Venezuela? Y si usted podría dar más detalles sobre el impacto que tienen las sanciones impuestas contra Venezuela en esta situación humanitaria, en la falta de acceso a alimentos, a medicamentos. Gracias.
Thank you for your question. I don't know if you got that, but certainly there's three questions there. The first one is that the U.S. is also talking about a military intervention. I'm sorry, but what I understand is that every option is on the table, but it is referring to the international humanitarian aid that USAID is providing. There is a self-evident proof in Colombia that the trucks are arriving with USAID aid. About the military action, well, I think the charter is pretty clear on military actions in Article 51 and Chapter 7 resolutions. I don't think that's what is taking place in this moment. And I would like to clarify, this is not the United States of America. It's a coalition of countries, Latin American countries, initiative. The Grupo de Lima, where the United States is no part of, Canada it is, they have very clearly expressed in their, not the last declaration, the declaration before, that Maduro's regime is a threat to the economic system and to the security of Latin America. So this is important to connect the dots. The second question was about the sanctions. Way before the sanctions, as you were seeing in 2017, before the sanctions, there was already a humanitarian crisis. This humanitarian crisis was self-made from grand corruption, from fraudulent schemes in exchange control that dilapidated the treasury of Venezuela. And that is why we have this suffering today. It's not because of the sanctions. These have been the smartest sanctions. The last one for PDVSA, it was brilliant. Why is it brilliant? You can still sell it, but not to the wrong people. The rightful president, interim president of Venezuela, is Juan Guaido.
A very last question, Mario, F.
Mario Villar con la agencia F. I wanted to ask you about this humanitarian intervention backed by military means that you're calling for. You're also telling us that Maduro controls the army and that there are foreign powers that have a very important military presence there. Aren't you basically calling for an all-out war in Venezuela right now?
Not at all. I do think, as I was saying before, there is a monopoly of force and violence by the Maduro regime against the population. I don't think the whole military armed forces are with Maduro. They're also suffering the same situations, and that's why, as you've noticed in the last few days, several officials have actually supported and recognized Guaido as the interim president, but it's too slow. People are dying every day. I ask you, what if in Spain or in Rome or this was happening? What would you do if your children were perishing? So are we just going to let them die because we do not believe in an intervention that is needed to save human lives? That's what I'm calling for. International humanitarian intervention. The rest of the elements should be sitting on the table and see how we can come into a political solution for their interests to be covered, as long as they're legal and they're within the norms of the Venezuelan constitution. But certainly, I don't think dialogue is going to solve this when you see Maduro's regime shooting students in the face and in the genitals, as we speak, torture them, and having 1,000 political prisoners.
Thank you, Mr. Medina, for this press conference. And if anyone has other questions, they can continue one-on-one talk after the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you. Sure.